frankly, I think that's what I just said earlier. It doesn't fit in our lifestyle. I don't get up, when I hear that on movies, but I don't use it myself. I think it's totally wrong. You can't say, for example, Holy Jesus, and meaning, oh, what is happening? What is that? It doesn't make sense to me. It's really, like you said, using you actually you actually said the word is saying the Lord's name in vain.
It is.
Because when you, at the mention of his name,
every knee
shall bow,
that's right.
And all the angels are waiting to see what's coming next, what's the comment here, and you're actually using it for what?
Yes.
So I think we come to a place where we have to understand it's very important not to do this. And if we know our position in Christ, we'll be very even more careful for the word we're saying and how we use it.
Well, I mean, I was just checking earlier, and I realized that is actually the second commandment. The first one is, no idols. Yeah. But the second commandment is do not use the Lord's name in vain. And I think there must be a reason why God has put it up. So, the second one and not the last one. Not to say that the last one is any less important, but I guess I'm trying to say is that obviously was on the Lord's heart very earlier on. And I think it's so important for us to understand that. I'm just thinking, my husband, I don't speak negatively about my husband. My husband has his weaknesses just like I do. But I deliberately don't speak negatively about my husband. And the reason why I do that is because I want to know that when he comes home, I don't see him with contempt because of how I've been speaking about him. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I credit that to how we speak about God, because if we speak about God in a negative way, when something does happen, let's say, somebody died or somebody's really sick and they're about to die. Do we really believe after we've used God's name as a curse word that God is going to actually help? Because again, we're talking about our belief systems here, and how we, so in other words, if I'm always cursing you, I know people can actually act and pretend, but if I'm always cursing you and saying, oh, Jan is just, behind your back, when I do see you, am I really going to be able to look you in the eye and speak to you nicely? And, and even if I am able to do that, it's not a complete lie. Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking in terms of I guess what I'm asking is, how do you think when someone uses the Lord's name in vain affect their relationship with God?
Oh, well, I believe, the Lord is telling me it depends even what's the relationship you have with him. You can't, if you're honest with God, there's certain things you won't obviously do. And
you make a good point there.
It's true, because if you're in a relationship with someone, even simple friendship, your neighbor, you have a good friend, and you move from that house and you go to another person's house and you talk about that neighbor, that means your relationship with that person you're probably an hypocrite either, or it's not deep. It's not a good relationship, or you're in it just for a season, or your heart is not in it. So you won't be able to talk about someone badly or using his name in vain, as the case of God, if your relationship is deep enough. So it's really about how deep is your relationship with God. And people do it often, and I have to question how is their relation. Once you get that part, you can understand
I think you're making a great point there. I think what I'm hearing you say is when you use the Lord's name in vain, it's a sign of a lack of fear of God, and a lack of or superficial relationship with God. And I think that's what we have to look at. We have to make sure that, because out of our hearts our mouth speaks. So it's actually reflecting something about our own hearts if we use in the Lord's name in vain in that way. I know another way, people don't really think about it this way, but another way that we actually use the Lord's name in vain is when we say, God said to me. When sometimes I've heard, I was speaking to one lady once, and I said to her, she had moved in with a young man, she had moved in with a young man, and she obviously wasn't married to him. So I asked her what made her do this, and she said, God told her to. And one of the things I do know about God is that God never says anything contrary to his word, as in the scriptures. And the Bible clearly says that you're not to be yoked with an unbeliever, and which is what she was actually doing. And I said that to her. I said, be careful how you use the Lord's name, because that is untrue. God never says anything contrary to his word. He says he actually exalts his word above his name. And, it really cautioned her. But this is another way in which we use the Lord's name. And then we say, God said, when God hasn't said.
Yeah.
And we need to check. There are lots of voices, but we need to also check to make sure that what we are hearing coincides with the word, because God is not confused. He doesn't say one thing in his word and then says another thing to us. I want us to take a break now. And we're just going to do a few ads, but, let's just take a break and then we'll come back. When we come back, I want us to talk about how we can actually curse ourselves. What is word curse? Because a while ago we were looking at curse words, but now we want to look at word curse. How can we curse ourselves? Do we actually do that? Is that a reality? Or is that, again, superstition?
Okay.
Now, right now, we just want to talk about word curse. Can we really curse ourselves? The Bible talks about the fact that God himself in the beginning saw darkness, but he said, let there be light. In Proverbs 18, verse 20, I think it says also that we are to speak life and not death. And I've often heard people, I don't know about your experience, Jan, but I know the first time I heard a message on this, I was probably a Christian for about 10 years. So I'd never heard the implications of a word being able to curse you until then. And the first time I heard it, I thought it was superstition. I actually thought, oh, please, it's not that serious. Let's not get too serious, What is your experience of word curse?
Okay. I'm not sure how deep I'm able to share this, but I think it's a journey for me, because I personally had to deal with a lot of things that the Lord brought up to my attention, that I've actually, in quotes, cursed myself by the things I've said or even thought that I said to myself, maybe not out loud, but deep down, and became like a sort of conviction of how I
built your belief system.
My belief system, or how do I conduct my life. And I think one scripture he brought to my attention is, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I believe it's very difficult I won't say non-Christian, but for someone who is a Christian, is imperative that they let Jesus transform their thinking. We know we're a new creation. We know as we're born again, we need to change certain things, but it doesn't happen automatically. And for me, that's what happened. I mean, growing up, I remember I had a very, in appearance, fine family, nice upbringing. My parents were together, but they were always fighting. And my mom and dad were always bringing up surgeon. And I think one of the core things, because my dad had a lot of mistresses, and that's all I ever knew my parents do. I've never seen them cuddle. I've never seen them do things. And in my young head, I sort of I closed myself up to hope that anything better can come out of a marriage.
Wow.
Or anything better can come out of a relationship. I will never be able to have someone love me. I will never feel, because I've never known any such thing. And I grew up like this. I built a hole around me. And it happened that I realized I was living in fear. I was living a lot of fear. And every time I would meet someone, immediately the ticking, I'm like, oh, they're gonna be like that with me. They're gonna do this to me. They're not. I can't trust them. I can't. So
wow.
As as I went on with the Lord and I asked the Lord to direct me, it was actually difficult for the Lord to reach to my heart. He said, I wanted to deal with this. Do you want to believe me to do that? And I think now it comes down to faith. Once you let the Lord open your understanding to bring every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Once you do that, you have faith to break down every stronghold that you have probably carried. You don't know. And some people don't know they've carried some, but and they think it's natural. Like, they can even say something like, I'm not good at this. I could never write a book, for example. I wish I can do that like this one, like this person, but I could never do this. And you have to go back and transform this sort of words you've been saying, because I believe these are how the devil is using circumstances, or you yourself are using circumstances you believe that you can't do to actually hinder you or stop you for doing them. Because everything is possible.
Everything is possible with God. You know, you're making a great point here, because what I'm hearing you saying is that we are not to exalt our circumstances over what God says. And in your case, you were exalting what had happened in what you saw in your parents' relationship, and you assumed, or you started to believe that is what would happen to you as well.
Definitely. I definitely thought that it was impossible to be happy. And it's strange, but even thinking about it right now makes me realize that I seriously, believe that was the case. And to be honest, I'm still in a journey for Lord to bring down those strongholds, because it's
a journey.
It's a journey.
I completely agree. It's a journey. I shared a few weeks ago on the show about, as I was growing up, and, just want to say welcome to you, Lilac Rose. Welcome. I see you in the chat room. Please feel free to comment, and I'll read any of your comments, so feel free to do that. I shared a few weeks ago on the show about just when I was growing up and the things I was called. And obviously, I'm sure I was called positive things, but when you're a child, you remember all the negative things, And I certainly remember being called all sorts of derogatory names, from a dog to a crow to fool, just really derogatory names. And what that does to a child, it just really destroys their self-esteem.
Yes.
And their self-worth. They really begin to feel that they can't do anything. I know for me, when I was in secondary school, I really didn't do anything. I was always quite intelligent, so I would answer the questions and that kind of thing, but I wouldn't really prepare for any test, or I just did not apply myself. And I think partly why I did not apply myself was because I didn't really think I could. Do you understand? And and just growing up with that wrong belief system. I thank God that I became a Christian at 18. So God was able to help me to really begin to apply myself in school thereafter. But really, during secondary school, I had really done nothing. It's just so important what you're saying, because can you think of some of the ways actually that we actually curse ourselves, indirectly or directly, not just like what you were saying, because what you're saying is really important, where we grew up in one situation, and as I've shared, and we automatically build a belief system around that. But can you think of any other time where you feel like, oh my gosh, did I just believe that I had to do that in order to have the results? Can you think of a time? Okay, are you ready to say? Because
I'm still thinking.
Okay, because I tell you one that I just thought about recently. I was praying for somebody. In general, I think I'm quite wordy, So I remember I was praying for somebody. I think they wanted healing, and I laid hands on them. And I felt the Lord was saying to me, your power is not in your words. So it's not about how many words you say as you pray for this person. It's about what you believe. And so as I laid hands on the person, I just laid hands and prayed. I said, Lord, I just thank you for this person's healing. I know you bought it 2,000 years ago, so I just released that healing. But so often, I remember I went to one conference, and what blew me away about this guy who, he literally would just call out, let's say he said, if you have cancer, stand up. and probably 10, 15 people stood up, and he would just release a prayer, simple prayer like,